Fantastic. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another amazing coffee conversation. So, today we are talking about shadow work. We're going to be talking about what is shadow work? Why is it important for your practice? How does it connect to shamanic Reiki? And how can we start this really beautiful practice of diving deep into our shadow selves and seeing these parts of ourselves that so often we want to push to the side, right? And so as we do, I would love to just start today's conversation with a definition of what is shadow work. We're going to really talk about understanding that shadow self and how we can embrace it. So when we're talking about shadow work, there are a few different definitions of it, depending on the practitioner, depending on how you are approaching this. But shadow work as a whole is our ability to look at, accept, and work with the shadow parts of ourselves. So, those hidden wounds, those inner parts of ourselves that we don't like to look at, the parts of ourselves that need love and healing, but we often tend to push them to the side. And so, this can be something like, those parts of yourself that exist, right? We might call them our shortcomings, we might call them our weaknesses, we might call them our inner wounds. They're these parts of ourselves that to our minds feel less than. They're the parts of us that we keep in the shadows, the parts that often feel scary, that feel like we wish they weren't there, that feel like we kind of want to push them to the side and ignore them. And what shadow work does is it is a process of coming to terms with this shadow self, with being able to look into your own darkness and into your own shadows and recognize that they are not there to be cast aside or to be separated or to be ignored, and to recognize that they aren't bad. These parts of us that we want to push to the side, that feel less than perfect or beautiful or happy or whatever it is, these parts of ourselves deserve love too. They deserve that attention. They deserve to be worked with. And so this is something where we can really start just diving in from the very start with shadow work, is thinking about, when I'm talking about this part of yourself that feels less than, this part of yourself that needs healing or needs attention or needs more work, and yet still feels small, or it feels like it's better to just keep it in the shadows. That part of yourself that comes to mind when I'm talking about this, thinking about, what does your mind say is wrong with that part of you? Right? So is it that it's not happy enough, that it's not peaceful enough, that it's not healed enough, that it's not patient enough? What is that word that your mind tells you this part of yourself is not blank enough? And this is going to be what we use in a very basic way to start our shadow work. So, for example, your brain, your mind, your conscious and subconscious self might determine that the parts of you that it deems as the shadow, the parts of you that it deems aren't enough, that are too small, that need healed, that need to be pushed to the side, the qualifier that it uses for these parts might be that it's not happy enough or patient enough or healed enough. And what we're going to do is we're going to take that word and we're going to be able to look at, this is how our minds define good and define bad in a very black and white dualistic perspective, right? Because that is the realm that our minds operate in. Our minds love to have good and bad, black and white, yes and no. And so in shadow work, what shadow work is our mind casting the different parts of ourselves as either good or bad. And often the difference between the two, the line between the two, is what your mind has decided is happy or not happy, enough or not enough, patient or not patient, etc. So looking deep within yourself and asking, what is my qualifier? What is that quality that I'm constantly trying to prove to myself that I have? What is that quality that my mind has decided, or that I learned from my parents, or that I have been taught is the epitome of a perfect person, right? Because we all have those. We all have these things that we picked up from childhood telling us that this is the thing about you that makes you not enough. Maybe you talk too much. Maybe you are too emotional. Maybe you have spiritual gifts and we don't talk about those. There's always something that we have been taught about ourselves is not enough. And so when we look and we think about, well, what is it about that part of ourselves that isn't enough? That's when shadow work really starts, because instead of pushing it to the side, instead of saying, no, no, I'm not going to look at that part of myself, I'm not going to deal with it. That's an ugly part of myself that I wish wasn't there. We're going to move into, how can I work with this part of myself? Why have I decided that this part of myself needs to be fixed? What can I do to create a more holistic and balanced relationship with this part of myself? Because the epitome of shadow work, the basis of what we're doing when we do shadow work, is we are recognizing that the light cannot exist without the dark, right? Everybody's really familiar with this yin yang symbol, right? Of the light and the dark in the light, and the light in the dark. And knowing that we are holistic beings, and when we approach ourselves and our healing from a soul level, there is no good and bad, there is no light and shadow, there is just one being. There is just our experience and how we are interacting with ourselves and the world around us. And so shadow work encourages us to move out of that perspective of duality, out of saying this part of me is bad or wrong, or I wish it was better, or it needs to heal. It takes the urgency out of healing. It takes the necessity out of it. Because if we're sitting here and we're saying, there's this part of me, this wound inside me that makes me feel like I am not enough and it needs to heal, that word, it needs to heal, is putting us back into the energy of a victim. It's putting us back into this energy of something is wrong with me and I am not enough. Versus if we say, there's this wound in me, there's this part of me that feels like it's not enough, that feels like it's not worthy, that feels like it's not happy enough or peaceful enough or whatever it is for you. There's this part of me, and I want to know how to recognize it. I want to know how to help it not feel that way anymore. What we are doing then is we are claiming our worthiness to heal and be healed. We are claiming the fact that this part right now doesn't feel like it's enough, but we know that it can. And there's an inherent difference in this approach to healing, right? There's an inherent difference between healing because we feel like we need to, and healing because we want to. And this is something that I find really interesting about shadow work, is because a lot of shadow work, a lot of practitioners approach shadow work as really identifying all of these quote unquote darker sides of yourself and then diving in really deep to just focusing on those parts so that they can be healed, which is a beautiful approach. But what it does is it keeps us in the mindset of looking for something that is wrong with us, looking for something that we could be doing better, looking for something that we could be healing, looking for something that needs to be fixed. If we are focused on healing ourselves, if we are constantly telling ourselves, oh, I'm working to get better, or I need to heal this, or I need to fix this, the flip side of that, the script that we're feeding our minds and that our minds are feeding us, is that we need to be fixed. We need to be healed. There's something inherently wrong with me. Versus if we can take all of this awareness and say, there is this part of me. I have a temper that comes out when I get triggered, or I have panic attacks sometimes, or I have that part of myself that feels worthless. And we say, and that part is worthy of healing too. That part is worthy to be seen. That part is worthy to be held. That part is worthy to exist. That's when true healing occurs, because instead of putting a label on it and saying, this is bad, this is wrong, this needs to be healed, this needs to be fixed, what we're doing is we're saying, this is worthy of being seen as whole. This is worthy of my good intention. This is worthy of my compassion. Because as we all know, true healing occurs when we come back into that connection with the inherent love and wholeness and compassion of the divine. When we are connected to the truth of who we are, we realize that all things are love, that all things are Reiki, that all things are this loving, flowing, compassionate energy. And the places that we need to be healed are the places that we have cut ourselves off from that energy, whether it was intentional or unintentional, right? So if you think about a wound or a shadow part of yourself that you've been working through since childhood. This might be something like maybe you had a traumatic experience in childhood, or maybe you had a parent tell you that you talk too much, or maybe you were laughed at when you said something funny, but you didn't understand that it wasn't that they were laughing at you, they just thought what you said was funny. There are these experiences that we have in childhood that teach us that we should be ashamed of ourselves, that we should stay quiet, that we aren't worthy to be seen, that we aren't worthy of other people's attention, that we are inherently flawed. And it's these little separations. You aren't worthy enough. You aren't quiet enough. You aren't pretty enough. You aren't whatever enough. As soon as we start bringing in the word enough into the conversation, we are inherently going against the flow of the divine. Because our worth, our enoughness was never a question to the divine. It was never a question of whether we were enough or whether we were worthy or whether we had earned those things. When we are really connected to that spirit, when we are connected to source, God, universe, whatever word resonates for you most, when we are truly connected to that energy, we understand that there is no such thing as not worthy. There's no such thing as not enough. Those are constructs that our minds create to help explain other people's actions toward us. They are qualifiers that our mind puts in to say, this person obviously believes something is wrong with me. So therefore, there must actually be something wrong with me. There must be part of me that is not healed, that is not whole, that is not enough, that is not worthy. And so part of the process of shadow work is being able to look at these parts of ourselves that we have labeled as wrong, that we have labeled as not enough, that we have labeled as being worthless, not worth our time, not worth our attention. Being able to look at these parts of ourselves and say, no, even these parts of me are worthy. Even these parts are enough because they are part of me. I can look at them and I can accept them. I can recognize that so many of these opinions that I have about myself, so many of these reactions that I have towards the world, so many of these triggers and these wounds that I have are simply there because I was taught to hold on to them as a child. I was taught by someone that I loved and I trusted that I wasn't enough, that I wasn't worthy. In a previous podcast, we've talked about how if someone hands you a costume jewelry, a piece of costume jewelry like a diamond, or an actual Herkimer diamond that's worth millions and millions of dollars, if someone hands you this piece of plastic jewelry and says, this is the most valuable diamond I have ever had, it is incredibly special to me, it's worth millions of dollars, please take care of it, you are going to take care of that diamond as if it was worth millions and millions of dollars, when in fact, it was a piece of costume jewelry. Versus if someone hands you a diamond that is worth millions and millions of dollars and they tell you, it's just a piece of plastic jewelry. You can do whatever you want with it. You can throw it away. You can, stick it in a drawer. I don't really care. Then you're probably not going to give as much care and attention or place as much value in this diamond. And the importance of this example is that it doesn't matter the inherent value of the diamond. It didn't matter whether it was a piece of costume jewelry or a true $1 million diamond. What mattered is what you were told about it. What mattered is how you were taught to value this thing. And it's the exact same thing that happens with our own sense of self-worth. We are taught how to value ourselves based on how much other people have valued us in our lives. And we take those beliefs on as our own. We believe that they are true because it's what we've seen played out in front of our eyes. But it has nothing to do with the inherent value of ourselves. It has nothing to do with the inherent value of who we are. All it has to do is what other people believed about us and taught us about ourselves. What that person told you about the diamond when they handed it to you. The beautiful part about this is that, if we were a jeweler and we had all the tools and we could take that diamond and we could look at it under the microscope and we could run all the tests and we could say, you know what, this actually is $1 million diamond. It's not a piece of costume jewelry. And so I'm going to treat it as such. If we have the proper tools and abilities and knowledge to be able to test that diamond and see what is its true value, not what I've been told, not what I've picked up from the people around me, not what I believe to be true, but what is actually true about this diamond. When we have those tools, then we can step away from the stories that we've been told about who we are, from the beliefs that other people have about us. And we can start to look at ourselves in an objective but holistic perspective of who are we truly? What are our strengths? What are those parts of ourselves that are ready for more compassion? What are we not accepting about ourselves? And how can we move into that acceptance? And that is the true work of shadow work, is looking at these wounds, looking at these triggers, looking at these reactions that we have that we wish we didn't, these parts of ourselves that we want to improve. The parts of ourselves that hold on to trauma, the parts of ourselves that hold on to difficult memories, the parts of ourselves that feel less than. And we are able to look at them and not only accept and acknowledge that we can evolve these parts, we can move past these things. We have the ability and the opportunity to be able to allow these parts of ourselves to flourish and to evolve and to expand into their full potential rather than staying stuck. But we can also look at these parts and realize that it's not our fault. There's no blame here for the fact that we have parts of ourselves that aren't as pretty or aren't as healed or aren't as whole. There's no blame here for the fact that we have limiting beliefs or we have triggers. There's no reason that we should feel like we are less than worthy because we have parts of ourselves that are still in the shadows. It is just how we have been taught, how we have been trained to view ourselves in light of the things other people have told us, in light of the things that we are bringing forward from our past. This is something that I talk to our shamanic Reiki students about all the time, is the fact that our minds are like Excel spreadsheets. You can put in numbers and past data, and you can have it run an equation and have it give you a new number. But that number is always going to be based on the past data that you've put into the Excel spreadsheet. It can't just generate a random number. And even the Excel capability of generating a random number is based on pre-programmed systems. And our brain is the same way. Our brain cannot just randomly generate something new. It can't just pull inspiration from the divine and bring it forward. Our minds are a processing software. They take data in from our past and they use it to create projections of the future. Our mind looks at where we've been and it says, well, our future must look pretty similar to this. And this is where we start to get stuck. When we start to look at ourselves, when we start to look at these shadow parts of ourselves, and we try to heal them based on what we've seen before or what we've heard about ourselves before, and we use our mind to try and fix the problem, we start to feel like we're in a never-ending cycle because your mind is just going to be pulling from the past to try and fix the problem that you have in the present, to create a different future, but the mind can't imagine a future that's different than the past. And this is where the soul level really comes into play in shadow work, is because you need that part of yourself that can see differently. You need that part of yourself that can expand beyond your past, that can expand beyond what you perceive to be your failures or the questions that you have or the problems that you need to be solved. In order to solve that problem, you have to be able to connect with the part of yourself that has the answers. And your mind doesn't have the answer. It has a projection of what it thinks the answer might be based on the problem that you're working with, based on your past experiences. But it's not going to be able to give you a true, new, solving, healing, transformational answer. Einstein has this amazing quote that a problem cannot be solved at the same level of consciousness at which it was created. And I quote this all the time because it's so important. We cannot solve a mind-made problem with our minds. We have to go in and find a new level of consciousness, find a new perspective, find a new part of our being to help us heal. And that part is our soul. That part is our intuition. That part is the piece of divine within. Because when we are looking at shadow work, when we are looking at those parts of ourselves that feel small, that feel not enough, that feel whatever it might be, we're looking at those parts of ourselves that our mind has determined to be not enough, that our mind has put a label on so that it can justify the actions of other people, so that it can say, oh, my dad did XYZ to me when I was a kid, then it must mean that I'm disgusting. It must mean that I am broken. It must mean that I'm not enough. Your mind has put a label on something to make sense of the past because that is its job. And thank goodness it did that, right? Because that is what allows us to move through difficult situations. That is what allows us to stay alive, to survive, right? But when we come to a point where we realize that those stories are no longer true, that we want to respond to situations differently, that maybe these parts of ourselves that we believe aren't worthy actually are worthy, when we start to have these realizations and ask these questions, that's when it's time to break out of survival mode and move into thriving, move into expansion, move into there is more here than just getting by. And that's what shadow work allows you to do is it allows you to look at these shadowy parts of yourself and say, I don't have to keep these stuck in the shadow. They don't have to remain in the dark. They don't have to be bad. They don't have to be scary. I can then bring these parts of myself, these shadowy parts, these parts that feel raw, these parts that feel wounded, these parts that feel not enough. I can bring them to my soul. I can bring them to my intuition. I can bring them deep inside myself and I can say, show me how to feel like these parts are worthy. Show me how to understand that these parts are enough. Show me how to heal these. Show me how to bring them back into the light because they are worthy of being seen. And this is where shadow work starts to tie in with things like shamanic Reiki, because what we're doing in shamanic Reiki is we are looking at all levels of someone's being, their physical, mental, emotional, and energetic health, but also all levels of those, right? We're not just looking at the good things. We're looking at the illnesses. We're looking at the intrusive objects. We're looking at the entities. We're looking at the cords that need cut. We're looking at the spiritual dust that settles on us over time. We're looking at our past traumas and how those have impacted us and how they create new triggers in our present day life. We're looking at all of these things while holding on to this Reiki perspective that this person is inherently whole. This person is already healed. This person is already enough. We're just bringing them through that process of remembering this. We're bringing them through this process of tearing down those walls that your mind has put up to help make sense of the world and showing you you don't need these anymore. You don't need these wounds to survive. You don't need these fears in order to be safe. You don't need these limiting beliefs in order to function. There is more. It is possible. And so, one of my favorite ways to start off doing shadow work is looking at what is my number one core wound. There's an amazing trauma researcher, Gabor Mate. You guys might know his work. He published the book, The Myth of Being Normal, I believe is the title. And it's an astounding book. I highly recommend if you enjoy psychology and research and how trauma impacts the brain, I highly, highly recommend checking this book out. But Gabor Mate says that in his studies, he has found that everyone has one core wound, one truth about themselves that they started to believe in childhood that they carried through with them, and that all their other limiting beliefs, all their other fears, all their other traumas, all their other wounds boil down to this one core belief about themselves. Typically, if we haven't done the shadow work, if we haven't done the work of coming into terms with ourselves, that belief is negative. So, for example, when I started this work, my core belief about myself was I am always wrong. And what that did is no matter what decision I made, I felt like it was the wrong decision. No matter who I decided to talk to, I felt like I said something wrong, like they were the wrong person, like I made the wrong choice. If something bad happened, it was always my fault. It didn't matter who was in that situation with me. It didn't matter the facts. It was, of course, my fault because my inherent belief was that I am wrong. I am the one who makes bad things happen. And this belief colored all of my life. It caused so much anxiety. I couldn't even pick out a movie if someone else was involved. If someone else was going to watch this movie with me, I couldn't even pick out a movie to watch with them without feeling incredibly anxious because I was convinced that I was going to make the wrong decision because at my core, I was wrong. And through the process of shadow work and through the process of shamanic Reiki and being able to journey and doing this inner work, I've started to shift that core belief into one that's more positive, into that core belief that I am enough. And so, looking at to start off with this shadow work process, thinking about what is your core belief? What is your core wound, is maybe a better way to put it. What is that negative belief, that I am statement that you are holding onto about yourself that you picked up from a very early age and has since colored all of your perceptions about yourself, about the world around you, about your place in it? Because what we can do when we have this awareness is we can start to see all of the ways that this really difficult, really intense, really negative belief impacts our lives. All the decisions that are made so much harder by this belief, all of the interpersonal relationships that have so much more tension because we're holding on to this negative belief about ourselves. What is that core belief for you? And then taking it a step further, why is that your core belief? Why is that the thing that you believe about yourself? Mine was, without going too deep for trigger warnings, mine was a very difficult situation with my father from the time I was 3 years old to the time I was 7. And that experience and the things that he would tell me and the things that he would say to me have made this belief a core part of who I was, this belief that I was wrong, that I was bad, that I wasn't enough. It made his voice the voice in my head that told me I was gonna fail, that told me I wasn't enough, that told me I wasn't going to succeed, that told me I was bad, that told me I was disgusting, etcetera, etcetera. It was this core belief that I had picked up from him. And when I had that realization, when I was able to sit down and put a pin in it, to be able to look at it and say, "No, you know what? It's not that I'm actually bad. It's not that I'm actually that piece of plastic costume jewelry. It's that my father, someone that I loved, that I trusted, that I put my faith in, told me I was bad, and so I believed him. He showed me over and over again that that's how much he valued me, and so I believed him. I believed that the little tiny amount of value, if any, that he placed in me must be my inherent value. That must be why I believe this. That must be why I feel this way. That must be why he did the things that he did, right? And so when we can look at this, when we can identify our core belief, our core wound, this negative thing that we believe about ourselves, and we can identify where we got it from. Who told us that? Who taught us to value ourselves like that? Who taught us actually to not value ourselves in that way, and why? What was it that we picked up that taught us this about ourselves? When we can start asking these questions, we can separate ourselves from this narrative instead of it feeling like it is inherently true, that it is a reality, that we are not enough, that we are bad, that we are wrong, that we are whatever it is for you. Instead of believing that that is an inherent reality, we start to see that that was a subjective perspective from someone else that we picked up and took on as truth. It was someone else's perspective, someone else's mind made description of us that we took on and believed was inherent. Like the difference between a piece of costume jewelry that someone tells you is worth $1 million or $1 million diamond that someone tells you is a piece of costume jewelry. We are all that $1 million diamond. There is never a question in the eyes of the divine, in the eyes of our guides, in the eyes of our higher selves, in the eyes of God. There is never a question of whether or not we are worthy, whether or not we are enough. The answer is always, of course. It is not possible for us to not be worthy. It is not possible for us to not be enough. But when we feel like we aren't enough, when we feel like we aren't worthy, it's because there is a block there. There is a wall that our minds have put up. And 9 times out of 10, that wall that has been put up is because someone else told us to. It's because someone else told us that this inherent value that we have, this $1 million diamond that we have at the center of our beings, was actually just a piece of costume jewelry. Not because it's true, but because it was their perspective. And so, what we can do when we have this core wound, when we realize that it wasn't something that we were born with, right? This was something that we were taught. This was something that we picked up. This was something that our minds held on to in light of our experiences so that we could function, so that we had a basis for, in my case, the way that I saw this playing out in my life is I had these experiences with my father, and I believed, you know what, I must be bad. But if it's my fault, if I'm the one that's bad, then I can spend the rest of my life trying to be better. I can spend the rest of my life trying to fix myself so that this piece of myself that is wrong, that is bad, that isn't enough, eventually, maybe if I work hard enough, if I try hard enough, if I punish myself enough, maybe it will be enough. Maybe it will be worthy. Maybe I'll be good enough to be loved. This part of your mind that says, if it is my fault, then that means I can fix it. Your mind loves to be in control. Your mind loves to hold the reins. And when something bad happens, when someone tells us that we're not enough, when they hurt our feelings in some way, when they tell us that there's a part of ourselves that is less than, our mind will hold on to that and say, great, Thank you for that because now it is my fault and I can fix it. I can spend the rest of my life resting on this idea that I am not enough so that I can work towards being enough, so that I can work towards being worthy. But the more we do that, the more we play into our mind's belief that we aren't worthy, the more we play into our mind's belief that we need to be fixed, the more energy we're giving to that story. It's like a weed, right? The more we water it, the more sunlight we give it, the more it's going to grow. It's the same thing with this storyline, with this core wound. The more we try to fix it, the more we're acknowledging the fact that it exists. The more we're saying, I am not worthy. I am not enough. I am not perfect, healed, whole, whatever it might be. I'm not lovable. The more energy we give to trying to fix something, the more energy we're giving to the fact that it is there in the first place, and we are effectively keeping it alive. And so, what shadow work does is it encourages us, instead of focusing on the shadow, instead of focusing on fixing it, on making the shadow light, on bringing things up in our shadow selves, it encourages us to be able to sit with it and look at it and acknowledge it and accept it and recognize it as false. Recognize that it doesn't actually exist. That part of myself that believed that I was bad, that I was wrong, that my father was right, and I had no inherent value, that part of myself wasn't real. It was something that was put on top of my inherent wisdom, a cap that was put on my soul, on my energy. It was a block that was put in place to cover up the truth that I am worthy, that I am enough, that I am lovable. And when I could recognize that, there was no process of making that block remove, making it come out. It was a process of letting it go, realizing that it wasn't a core part of me, that it wasn't an essential part of me, that it wasn't the thing that was keeping me safe. It wasn't the thing that was making me lovable. All of my efforts to be better, to be healed, to be enough, those weren't the things that made me enough, that made me lovable, that made me worthy. I was already worthy. I was already enough. I was already lovable. And the process of shadow work is letting yourself come into this awareness that at the end of the day, you are already healed. You are already enough. You are already whole, even in these mental blocks that we have, even in these wounds that we carry with us, even in these traumas that we've experienced, even in this layer of spiritual dust that we carry around while we're doing this work. Even in that, you are still loved and you are still worthy. And this is the beauty of shadow work, is it allows us to acknowledge the parts of ourselves that aren't true, that aren't inherent to our nature, that go against our soul's integrity of being healed, of being whole, of being enough, of being complete. We can acknowledge those parts of ourselves. I was explaining this to a friend of mine the other day, how we can think of life force energy or the divine or spirit as a stream that's flowing up and through us. And our mind loves to build dams in that stream. Our mind loves to try and control the flow of life force through us. And when that happens, we don't feel good. We feel anxious. We feel depressed. We have physical illness. Something is wrong. We feel frustrated. We feel that internal static of, I don't know what to do. Something's wrong and I don't know how to fix it. And it's because our mind has stopped that flow of life through us, that flow of the divine through us, thinking that controlling the flow is going to be safer than just letting it gush forward. And so in those places, shadow work allows us to recognize, where have we built a dam? Where have we stopped the flow of life through us because it felt safer than just letting it flow? And it helps us to recognize that we don't have to leave that dam there. We don't have to have a block there. It wasn't there in the first place, and it can be taken out again so that that true essential flow of life, of nature, of wisdom, of the divine can continue to flow through us the way that it was originally intended, the way that it was meant to be flowing through us. And so this is really the beauty, again, of shadow work, is it is allowing us to become aware of all the parts of who we are, of every aspect of our being, and to find compassion for it, to find love for it, to recognize that it was a dam that our minds made to keep us safe, and that if we can remove it, even if it's just one stick at a time, if we can allow it to be set free, then that flow of life is going to keep moving through. It's going to keep moving forward. That flow doesn't stop just because we tried to stop it for a while, right? This is something that often happens in shadow work when we start to face these darker parts of ourselves, when we start to come to terms with our triggers and our wounds and our past traumas and the parts of ourselves that we feel like aren't enough. There can come a point in time in this healing process where we start to feel shame for the fact that we had to go through the healing process in the first place, for the fact that we ever forgot that we weren't worthy, for the fact that we ever went against the flow of life, for the fact that we ever denied the universe in its giving of our inherent worth and enoughness. And this is something, again, that shadow work tells us. This stream, this river that is flowing, is the water is always going to continue to flow. No matter how many dams you build, no matter how many times you try to turn off the flow or control it, it is always going to flow because it is your birthright. It is your inherent ability. It is your inherent right to have that life force flowing through you because you are always enough. You are always worthy, even if you aren't allowing yourself to see it. And so I would love to just wrap up today's conversation by giving you guys some tangible tools that you can use to start leaning into shadow work, because the purpose of shadow work is to ease these negative feelings that we have in our lives, these feelings of anxiety, of depression, of not being enough, of constantly trying to figure out what other people are thinking about you and what you did that was good and what you did that was bad and what you could have done better and what's the right decision and what's the wrong decision. All of these levels of mental dis-ease, and then also the levels of physical dis-ease that we have when we've stopped that flow of life. Our autoimmune issues, our chronic pain, our heart arrhythmias and chest pain, our joint pain, all of that pain that comes when we have stopped the flow of life through us because our mind is trying to control. The goal of shadow work is to help these things ease, is to realize that we don't need those blocks and to slowly start picking them off to allow that water to flow, to allow that water to be in its inherent state, to not control it, to recognize our own worth and worthiness in the eyes of the divine, in the eyes of the universe. And so when we talk about shadow work, there are so many ways that you could start, right? You could Google right now how to begin shadow work, and Google would have thousands of search results for you. But I think one of my favorite ways to start is what we described earlier of find your core wound. Find that core belief that you're carrying around about yourself. Figure out who taught you that. Who was the one who kind of planted that seed of belief in you about yourself? And then really look at it, write it on a piece of paper so you get it out of your mind, you get it out of your energy, and you're just looking at it. And one of my favorite things to do with these is to put it on a sticky note and put it on my fridge. And the reason I do this is because eventually, day after day of looking at this sticky note that says you are bad or I am bad or however I want to phrase it, eventually I look at that sticky note and I say, no, it's not true. Because what you've done is you've separated yourself from the story. You've, instead of feeling like you are tangled up with this story, that this story and you are one, that it is the truth, instead there's you and then there's the story. And you're able to look at it from an objective perspective, and you're able to take the emotion out of it and just look at it and say, no, I'm not bad. I'm not wrong. I am enough. I am worthy. And so identifying that core belief is really key, because then you're going to be able to start noticing the patterns in your life, noticing all of the places in your life that that belief touches, all of the ways that that belief makes you act, all of the things that that belief makes you do. And then from there, you can start making a list, start keeping track of these things that make me anxious because of this core belief, right? So one of mine on that list might be, I can't even pick out a movie without feeling anxious because I'm convinced I'm going to be wrong, right? And then on another list, same piece of paper if you like, make another list about all the parts of yourself that you struggle with, all the parts of yourself that you feel aren't enough, that you feel aren't worthy. Write them down, get them out of your head, get them out onto a piece of paper so that you can look at them from that objective perspective. And then start noticing how many of those things are things that other people told you weren't enough. For instance, if you have one on there of, I talk too much, or I don't have anything important to say, Is that something that your mom told you? Is that something that your teacher told you? Is that something that a friend said in passing? How many of these things about yourself that you don't like are actually things that other people taught you not to like? And what we do as we do this work is we start to give ourselves mercy. We start to give ourselves freedom and compassion, and realizing that these wounds, these shadows, were not necessarily things that we chose for ourselves. But we do have the power, we do have the ability, and we do have the right to choose differently now. Now that we're aware, now that we can accept and understand these shadow parts of ourselves, we have a choice to keep them in the shadows, to keep them separated, to keep that dam in the river, or to bring them into the light, to let that water flow, to choose to recognize and accept the fact that we are worthy, that we are more than those things, we are more than those limiting beliefs. And that brings us to another tool that we use in shadow work. And that is this idea of when a limiting belief comes up, when a trigger comes up, when you find yourself feeling frustrated at yourself or sad at yourself or disgusted with yourself because you could have done better, you could have done more, you could have been more. Saying to yourself, I am more than that. I am more than that thought. I am more than this belief. And it sounds so simple, but it is incredibly powerful, because what you are doing is you are telling your mind that there is more to reality than the story it's telling. There is more to you, there is more to your life, there is more to your inherent value than what other people have told you, than the story that your mind has chosen to carry with you. There is more. And the more you tell yourself, I am more than this, I am more than that, I am more than this belief, the more you're going to be able to see what's on the other side of that, what's on the other side of that story. What is there beyond that? You're going to open yourself up to being able to see what's on the other side, to see what is more. And then from there, once we've started this work of looking at our shadows, acknowledging that they aren't our fault, but they are our responsibility, right? It's not our fault that we have these wounds. It's not our fault that we have these shadows. It's not our fault that we have these fears about ourselves, but it is our responsibility to heal them, to choose differently, to take the next step. No one else can do it for us. Shadow work is inherently about respecting your own autonomy and acknowledging your own responsibility for your healing, because no one else can do it for you. And that's hard. That's an incredibly difficult thing to understand and be willing to accept and to fully step into. But the fact that you're here, the fact that you're listening to this, the fact that you've made it this far in this audio is incredible, because it says that you are willing to do the work, that you are willing to show up, that you are willing to look inside yourself and choose differently. So, when you've done all of this, when you've acknowledged the shadow, when you've accepted that it wasn't your fault, but it is your responsibility, when you've started to look at the origins of where are these shadows coming from, and you've started to identify your core wound, then we can start looking at what's the opposite? What's the opposite of that core wound? What would I love to believe? What would I love for my core belief about myself to be? What is the most empowering, authentic, true, inspiring, loving, compassionate belief that I would love to have about myself? Even if it doesn't feel true right now, even if that seems like a stretch, what would it be? If I could believe anything about myself, if I could have the most positive, most loving belief about myself, what would it be? And then start looking for all the ways in your life that that belief is already true. Start looking, start priming your mind, instead of looking for negativity, looking for problems, looking for the ways that you weren't enough. Start looking for the ways that you are enough. Start looking for the little things that you do that make other people feel loved. Start looking for the little things that you do really well, the things that you can take pride in, the things that you enjoy, all the times that you smiled, all the times that you laughed, all the times that you felt loved. All of the things that you did that made you go, wow, I just did that. Start looking for the good things that are coming to you and through you. Because the more we can do that, the more we can put energy into this positive belief, this positive truth about ourselves that our soul brings forward, that comes from our inherent understanding of our worth in the divine's eyes, of our inherent value. The more we can act from that place, the more water, the more sunlight we are giving to that plant, the more we are allowing that to be what we're cultivating, the more we're allowing that to be what's growing. And it's a process, right? Shadow work is an incredibly detailed and intricate process. It can take a long time. I like to tell my students and my clients, however long you've been dealing with these anxieties or these triggers or these feelings, take at least a quarter of that time to heal it. And oftentimes it doesn't take that long, right? Oftentimes it doesn't take, if you've been dealing with a problem for 40 years, it doesn't take 10 years to heal it. But if we can give ourselves that container, if we can give ourselves room to be able to grow the way we need to be able to heal the way we need to be able to be in process for as long as we need to, then we're going to have more space for compassion. We're not going to feel stressed about, oh, well, I need to be healed tomorrow. I need to have this fixed tomorrow. We don't need anything when it comes to healing. There's nothing that we need. We already have everything we need. We already are everything we need. What we're doing is we're walking the path of remembering that. We're walking the path of coming back into our inherent truth and our inherent worth and our inherent value. There's nothing that we need. There's nothing that we need to add. There's nothing that we need to fix. There's nothing that we need to change. We're just walking the path of remembering. And when we can give ourselves time and space and grace and compassion in that, it gives us so much more room to expand and evolve and heal at our own pace, in our own time, and in a really beautiful and profound way. And so this is something that we do help you do in our Soul Rising program. I'm sure you guys have heard about Soul Rising by now. It is our 4-month online shamanic Reiki program. But beyond shamanic Reiki, we're going to dive into things like inner child healing, like shadow work, like personal development, and looking at how is this chronic pain that you're experiencing related to these wounds that you're carrying, and how can we heal them both? Looking at how do the chakras connect with the different ages at which you experience these really hard things. If you are that person who were told that you talk too much when you were younger, how has that impacted your throat chakra, and how can we activate it and help it heal on the energetic level, on the emotional level, on the psychological level? How can we expand beyond these shadow parts of ourselves? How can we take these limiting beliefs, these traumas, these wounds, and bring in that compassion, but also bring in this knowledge and this wisdom to be able to recognize our inherent worth, to release those blockages, to release the limiting beliefs, to release the traumas, and to move beyond, to find out what is that. It is on the other side of that statement, I am more than that. What is more for you? This course is really going back to that metaphor with the diamond. This course is going to give you those jeweler's tools to be able to discover your own inherent worth, to be able to discover your own inherent value. That is what this course does, is it gives you the space, the support, the compassion, the community, and the tools and the wisdom and the time to be able to look at yourself and discover your inherent value, all while having professors and support team and fellow students who are holding you and lifting you up in their view, their perspective, their witnessing of your inherent worth and your inherent value. They are holding that energetic vibration for you so that you are constantly being lifted up while you're doing this work. And so this is a 4-month container that covers so much. We have so much pre-recorded materials and guided meditations and lessons and workbooks and tips and tricks that you can use, like the ones that we've given you in today's podcast, tangible things that you can use to create a difference in your life. Then we also have live classes where you can come and you can ask questions. And you can say, hey, in the course of my healing this week, XYZ happened, and I need to know, what does that mean? What do I do about it? What do you guys think? Has anyone else experienced this? And then you have that community where people can come and you can share and you can say, look, this is what I experienced. How have you experienced that? And someone else can say, yes, here's been my experience and here's what I'm working on healing. You have that accountability so that you actually have to do the work, right? I know that everyone listening to this has had the intention to do some really, really deep healing work at some point or another. We have this routine in our head of the book we're going to read, the lemon water we're going to drink in the morning, the yoga we're going to do every day. Maybe we do it for 2 or 3 days, but then we stop because we don't have anyone keeping us accountable, except the voice in our mind that tells us we're not enough, that tells us we're going to fail anyway. So of course, we go back to living in those cycles. When the only voice that we have guiding us forward is that voice of limitation, that shadow voice within us telling us that we aren't enough, of course, we're not going to move forward. And so, what this course does is it gives you all of the tools, it gives you all of the support, it gives you all of the training, it gives you all of the time, but it also gives you 5, 10, 15, 20 other voices telling you that you can do it, that you are enough, holding you accountable to these commitments that you've made so that you're actually making a change. All while learning and deepening in your spiritual connection to Reiki, to nature, to your guides, to your spirit team, to your chakras, to your ability to heal, to the spirit world, and to non ordinary reality. Obviously, I am biased, right, in saying that I have never seen another course like this one. But I can tell you that I have looked, right? We do market research, we do all kinds of research. We talk to our students about other courses they've taken. We look online, we talk to fellow teachers. We do our connection in the community. And I can tell you that I have never seen another program quite like this one that approaches things on so many different levels, getting at the psychological and emotional and energetic and physical levels of healing and working on all of them while bringing you this space of compassion, bringing you so much support, so much love, so much commitment to the fact that you are already enough. We're helping you walk that path of remembering. Classes start on February 10th, and one of the most common questions we get is, will I be able to attend a live call? And that is something that we are very passionate about. That's something that makes this program very unique, is we tailor the call schedule to our students. We make sure that every single student can make at least one live call a week. And so we don't have a call schedule set yet because we're waiting for all of our remaining students to join us so that we can see what times work best for you. When can you get on a call? So that is soul rising. You guys have heard so much about it by now, and I am so grateful that you have listened. I'm so grateful that you've opened yourself up to questioning, is this right for me? And I think really, again, the question is, do you have that calling? Do you have that internal knowing that there is more, that you are more than this, that you are ready to grab those jeweler's tools and discover your own inherent worth? And have the tools and the techniques and the support and the community and the training and all of it to be able to take that step, to be able to step into your inherent worth, to be able to do this shadow work and step into the light with this knowledge, to bring all of yourself to the table, to witness and love and have that compassion for all of you, while deepening in your spiritual work, while deepening in your connection to nature, while deepening in your connection to your spirit team, while enhancing your spiritual skills and your connection to Reiki and your ability to heal, while feeling that upliftment of your soul and feeling that joy and that high vibration that you can carry in yourself when you're releasing those dams that we're putting in the water. If you're ready to feel that life force flowing through you and taking you forward on your journey with joy and love and compassion and trust, then I would encourage you to take a look at Soul Rising. You can click the link below. If you're not sure, if you have questions, send me a message on Facebook or book a call. I would love to chat with you. Let's book a 15-minute call to talk about, what is Soul Rising? What are you working on in your life? And is this the right next step for you? If it is, fantastic. If not, that's okay too. I firmly, firmly believe that if you are meant to be in this course, if you are meant to do this healing work, if you are meant to be with us, that you will feel that call, that your intuition will tell you, yes, this is for you. And so if you're having that, yes, this is for you moment, if you're feeling the call, enroll now. Or if you're not quite ready, if you have more questions, send me a message, send me an email. Let's book a call. Let's chat. Let's get you where you want to be, where you need to go. And until then, thank you all so much for committing to your healing, for showing up, for being curious about shadow work, for being curious about the parts of yourselves that are ready for more, that are ready for expansion, that are ready to be recognized in their inherent value and worth. I hope you got something out of today's podcast. I would love to hear your top takeaway or aha moment over in the Reiki Cafe Community Facebook group. And until next time, thank you all again so much for joining with me today, and we'll see you next time.